I've got some troubling news about England's royal family. The orchestra was still performing when King Charles suddenly noticed the sparkling red gemstones on Camilla's wrist. His face changed in an instant. Conversation slowly faded, glasses paused halfway to every guest's lips, and everyone seated at the royal banquet immediately sensed that something was terribly wrong. Within moments, the king raised his hand, instructed the orchestra to stop, and brought one of the most prestigious state banquets of his reign to an unexpected halt. Before we reveal what this shocking moment could mean for the royal family, be sure to subscribe so you never miss our latest updates. Charles had arrived at Buckingham Palace expecting everything to proceed perfectly. A state banquet, organized to welcome important foreign leaders, was designed to showcase unity before diplomats, government officials, senior royals, and the royal household staff. Instead, one bracelet threatened to expose a deeply personal conflict in front of everyone present and the entire world watching. Camilla entered the hall smiling, convinced the ruby bracelet completed her elegant appearance. At first, she believed her husband's gaze reflected admiration. But seconds later, she realized he wasn't looking at her face. His eyes were fixed on the bracelet around her wrist. Her smile disappeared instantly. Quietly, she pulled her arm closer, almost as if she could hide what Charles had already recognized. William noticed it only moments later. He remained silent, but his jaw tightened as old memories rushed back. Diana's bracelet was never just another royal jewel. It was a deeply personal keepsake connected to his mother, her life, and the precious memories left behind after her passing. Seeing Camilla wearing it without warning felt less like royal tradition and more like crossing a line. Charles calmly placed his dinner knife beside his untouched plate. He lifted one hand toward the orchestra and spoke in a steady but chilling voice. "The banquet will pause immediately." The final note echoed through the grand hall before complete silence settled across the room. Then the king announced that dinner would not continue until the bracelet was removed, and everyone understood exactly how it had appeared there. Camilla didn't respond right away. Charles knew that bracelet was supposed to remain locked inside a private family collection, protected by strict instructions and never meant for public use. Its appearance could only mean that someone had entered a restricted storage area, bypassed palace procedures, or deliberately ignored established protocol. A senior palace official quickly confirmed the worst. No jewelry request had been submitted. No official approval had been granted. This could not be dismissed as a simple wardrobe mistake. Charles slowly turned toward his wife. "Where did you get it?" he asked. Camilla hesitated before quietly speaking a single name. At that moment, William pushed his chair back and looked toward the palace doorway. The bracelet had already stopped the banquet, but the unanswered question surrounding its appearance was now threatening to divide the entire royal family gathered inside the room. To the distinguished guests seated across the hall, it looked like nothing more than an elegant ruby bracelet sparkling beneath the chandeliers. But for Charles, it represented painful memories from a marriage marked by regret. For William, it was a treasured reminder of his mother's private life. And for Camilla, it symbolized something even more dangerous: the belief that becoming queen had finally given her access to every royal treasure, every private room, and every memory that had once remained beyond her reach. Charles felt the weight of history pressing heavily on his shoulders. Diana's personal belongings had never been treated like ordinary crown property. Many of those treasured pieces carried emotional value that belonged first to her sons, not to the institution itself. Charles understood that distinction better than anyone, which was exactly why seeing the bracelet on Camilla's wrist felt so deeply unsettling. William didn't simply see rubies. He saw pieces of his childhood. He remembered rooms filled with his mother's laughter, quiet conversations before public appearances, and the unbearable silence that followed her death. For years, he had worked to protect everything that remained of Diana's private world because those items were far more valuable than jewelry. They were proof that she had once been there. Meanwhile, Camilla could feel every pair of eyes fixed upon her. She believed Charles should have spoken to her privately, away from foreign leaders, diplomats, and government officials. Instead, he had stopped the entire banquet, leaving her embarrassed before everyone in the room. Her humiliation slowly transformed into resentment. She reached toward the bracelet once again, almost hoping that small gesture could somehow restore the control she had just lost. Catherine noticed the tension almost immediately. She recognized the uncertainty in Camilla's movements and realized the bracelet could not have been chosen by accident. At the same time, she saw William's frustration building. His shoulders became rigid, and his eyes never drifted away from the red gemstones. Quietly, Catherine reached toward him, offering a silent reminder to remain calm. William remembered seeing the bracelet years earlier, carefully stored inside a velvet-lined case. It had been designated for private family custody, meaning it was preserved specifically for Diana's family rather than included among the jewels used during official royal ceremonies. He knew it had never appeared on any approved borrowing list. Someone had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. Charles now faced an impossible decision. If he defended Camilla, many would see it as another betrayal of Diana's memory. If he criticized her publicly, he risked exposing cracks within his own marriage before an audience of international guests. Either choice carried serious consequences. Confusion spread through the banquet hall as palace attendants politely guided diplomats and visitors toward a nearby reception room. William, however, remained exactly where he was. Catherine leaned closer and whispered softly, "Not here." Without taking his eyes off Camilla, William answered. She knew exactly what she was wearing. Moments later, Charles instructed everyone else to leave the room. Only Camilla, William, Catherine, and one trusted senior palace aide were asked to remain behind. As the massive doors slowly closed after the final guest, the formality of the evening disappeared completely. No longer surrounded by ceremony, the room now held only a husband, a wife, a grieving son, and the single bracelet none of them could ignore. But the real story hadn't begun inside the banquet hall. It had started 9 days earlier, inside a private dressing room where Camilla had been presented with several jewelry options for the state banquet. The entire incident lasted less than 10 minutes. Yet during those few minutes, a boundary the palace had protected for decades was quietly crossed. One request, one refusal, and one private instruction. Those 3 moments set in motion everything that was now unfolding behind the closed doors of Buckingham Palace. Camilla had expected nothing more than a routine jewelry fitting. Every piece selected for a state banquet normally followed a strict process. It had to be officially recorded, approved, transported under supervision, and returned immediately after the event. Those procedures existed because royal jewels carried historical importance, family significance, and even political sensitivity. One unauthorized item had the power to transform a formal celebration into a personal scandal. Several approved ruby pieces had already been presented to the Queen Consort. Each one perfectly suited the diplomatic theme of the evening, and none had any connection to Diana. She could have chosen any of them without creating the slightest controversy. Then everything changed. An archival catalogue was opened, revealing an old photograph of Princess Diana wearing a striking ruby bracelet, the very same bracelet Charles would later recognize instantly. Camilla stopped turning the pages. She pointed directly at the photograph. "I'd like that one," she said. The royal jewelry curator didn't hesitate. "I'm afraid that piece isn't available, Your Majesty." Camilla looked at her with visible surprise. The curator calmly explained that the bracelet remained sealed under private family instructions connected to Prince William and Prince Harry. Those restrictions protected Diana's personal jewelry for her sons and prevented it from being treated like an ordinary ceremonial loan. The answer affected Camilla more deeply than anyone expected. She didn't simply hear a rule. She heard another reminder that Diana's memory still occupied places, possessions, and emotional territory she could never fully claim. Even after becoming queen, there were still doors that remained closed to her. Camilla's expression hardened. "Then perhaps it's time someone reconsidered who decides what's available," she replied. The curator quietly closed the catalogue. She respectfully explained that royal status did not override private family restrictions. Without another word, Camilla dismissed everyone except her senior dresser. After the room was empty, she admitted something she had kept hidden for years. She was tired of feeling like a temporary guest inside her own household. Her dresser shifted uncomfortably but offered no reply. The silence only deepened Camilla's frustration. Later that afternoon, she contacted a longtime palace aide through a private recorded call. He knew the older archive records and understood where previous inventory transfers had created small gaps in the tracking system. Camilla asked whether the bracelet could be temporarily reassigned without requesting formal approval from the family. The aide reviewed the records and eventually discovered a narrow opportunity. Months earlier, during an archive reorganization, the bracelet's case had been moved, creating a brief break in the tracking process. Still, he offered one serious warning. The king will recognize it immediately. Charles himself had originally chosen the bracelet for Diana during their marriage. 9 days later, What had begun as a quiet act of defiance inside a private dressing room would be shining beneath the grand chandeliers of Buckingham Palace, securely fastened around Camilla's wrist. With the banquet hall now empty and the massive doors closed, Charles no longer needed to hide his frustration. He stood quietly at the head of the table while Camilla remained seated beneath the chandeliers, one hand still resting over the ruby bracelet. William watched from only a few feet away. Then the king spoke 3 firm words that erased every layer of royal ceremony. "Take it off." Camilla didn't move. Catherine remained beside William, while the senior palace aide waited silently near the opposite end of the room. Charles had deliberately asked only these 4 people to stay because he wanted answers before security officers or archive officials became involved. The Royal Archive, the highly protected system where valuable objects and historical records were kept under strict supervision, would soon become central to the investigation. Camilla looked directly at her husband. "You could have spoken to me privately," she said. Charles answered without raising his voice. "I am speaking to you privately now." Still, Camilla refused to remove her hand from the bracelet. She accused Charles of stopping the banquet simply to satisfy William, and to prove that Diana still carried more influence within the family than his own wife. The embarrassment she felt quickly turned into anger. She claimed he had chosen the memory of a failed marriage over the dignity of the woman sitting before him. William finally stepped forward. Catherine reached toward him, hoping to calm the situation, but he had already made up his mind. "This isn't about choosing between 2 women," William said. "It's about taking something that was protected for her children." Camilla immediately insisted she had taken nothing from William. He answered firmly. "That bracelet was kept out of ceremonial use for a reason. Wearing it without permission doesn't make it royal property. It only proves someone believed Diana's sons could simply be ignored." Charles slowly walked around the table until nothing stood between him and Camilla. When he spoke again, his voice remained calm, making every word feel even heavier. "This wasn't an accident," he said. "You saw it. You requested it. And you chose to wear it. That was a decision, and every decision carries consequences." At last, Camilla admitted that she had requested the bracelet during the private fitting after the curator refused her request. However, she insisted she had never entered the archive herself and refused to reveal who had actually delivered the bracelet. The senior palace aide noticed something unexpected. The bracelet's clasp had been replaced. Someone had altered it so it would properly fit Camilla's wrist. That discovery proved the plan had been arranged long before the banquet ever began. Without hesitation, Charles ordered palace security to seal the jewelry rooms and collect every access record from the previous 10 days. Slowly, Camilla unclasped the bracelet and placed it on the table between them. The rubies touched the porcelain plate with a faint click. Barely above a whisper, she said, "You may regret discovering who helped me." The bracelet was finally off her wrist. But the real danger no longer rested in the jewelry itself. It rested in the unseen person who had placed it there. By midnight, the banquet controversy had grown far beyond a single bracelet. Locked display rooms were being inspected, access permissions were suspended, and senior palace officials were called back from their homes. Yet the most important decision still rested with one man. Alone in a private room, Charles realized that whatever he chose next would shape not only his marriage, but also the authority of the crown within his own family. The recovered bracelet rested inside its closed case. Charles never touched the gemstones or even the clasp. Regret weighed heavily against his anger, while the silence around him felt almost unbearable. He understood this was no longer a personal disagreement. If palace security systems had been manipulated, then trust inside the royal household itself had been broken. A few moments later, William entered. His patience had already disappeared. The prince demanded consequences for everyone involved, including Camilla. Charles cautioned him that acting out of anger could transform a family dispute into a constitutional crisis, meaning a personal scandal serious enough to damage public confidence in the monarchy. Soon afterward, a restricted meeting began. Charles sat with the keeper of the privy purse, the official responsible for royal finances and household resources, alongside the palace security director, the jewelry curator, and William. The king refused to accuse anyone until the entire chain of custody had been confirmed, showing exactly who handled the bracelet and at what time. Then the first major breakthrough arrived. Security records revealed that Camilla's senior household aide had entered the archive corridor twice after the jewelry request had been rejected. Both entries had been authorized using an access code connected directly to the Queen Consort's office. William leaned forward. "That's enough." But Charles remained composed. He refused to rush toward judgment. As king, he possessed the authority to suspend privileges, cancel ceremonial jewelry access, and remove staff from active duty. Even so, he wanted evidence strong enough that no one could later dismiss his decision as a motion disguised as justice. The jewelry curator then delivered even more disturbing news. The bracelet storage case had been returned to the archive completely empty, while the inventory records had been altered to indicate the jewel was still safely sealed inside. Someone hadn't simply borrowed the bracelet. Someone had carefully created a false record to conceal its disappearance. William's restraint finally broke. He told Charles that silence had protected influential people within the palace for far too long. He refused to let his mother's belongings become another painful secret hidden for the sake of convenience. Without another word, Charles signed the suspension order. "This applies to her office immediately," he said as he placed the pen down. William looked directly at him. "Then make sure it applies to everyone involved." Just then, the security director opened another file. His next discovery changed everything. Camilla's aide had not acted alone. A second authorization code had also been used, one connected to an entirely different section of the royal household. The first punishment had now been issued. But the altered records suggested the betrayal reached much deeper than anyone had first imagined. Before dawn, Camilla's world had already begun to change. Her access to the royal jewelry collection was suspended, 2 members of her household staff were removed from duty, and her next official engagement quietly disappeared from the royal diary. No public announcement had been made, yet the palace machine was already moving with remarkable speed. For the first time since becoming queen, Camilla realized how quickly royal privilege could turn into royal isolation. She left the banquet hall under discreet escort and returned alone to her private apartment. Charles did not accompany her. Soon afterward, palace staff arrived to collect every borrowed piece of jewelry assigned to her office. Before sunrise, the official royal diary, the schedule of public engagements, had already been updated. Her next appearance had been removed. Charles refused to present an image of unity while questions still surrounded the investigation. Camilla entered her dressing room and suddenly stopped. The jewelry cases were gone. Only faint outlines remained where they had stood just hours earlier. Slowly lowering herself into a chair, she stared at the empty table. "They didn't even wait until morning," she quietly said to her senior dresser. The dresser stepped closer, hoping to comfort her, but Camilla asked the question neither of them wanted to answer. "Do they think I'm a thief?" Silence filled the room. The hesitation alone wounded her. For years, Camilla had fought for acceptance within the royal family. Yet one bracelet had placed her back into the role she feared most, the outsider blamed for stepping into memories that were never truly hers. Charles deepened that isolation. Camilla requested a private meeting with him later that night, but the king declined. Through a palace aide, he sent a brief message. He would not meet with her until the investigation established exactly who had removed the bracelet and who had altered the official records. Meanwhile, the suspended household aide submitted a formal statement. He admitted retrieving the bracelet but insisted he had acted only after receiving a handwritten instruction carrying Camilla's personal cipher, a private identifying mark used to authorize requests from her office. Camilla immediately denied writing the note. That single claim shifted the entire investigation. Either the Queen Consort was hiding the truth, or someone had forged her authority to protect a much larger scheme. Around the same time, Catherine received another troubling update from the jewelry curator. The replacement clasp attached to the bracelet carried a tiny repair mark connected to a jeweler who had previously worked for another senior royal household. Catherine instantly recognized the danger. Someone outside Camilla's closest staff may also have been involved in preparing the bracelet. Later that morning, William received an unexpected private request. Camilla wanted to meet him alone.
No Charles.
No palace officials.
No ads.
She promised she would finally explain why she had chosen to wear Diana's bracelet. Now surrounded by suspicion and stripped of every layer of royal ceremony, Camilla turned to the one person least likely to forgive her. There were no palace officials in the room, no security officers, and no king standing between them. William entered expecting excuses. Instead, he found Camilla standing quietly beside the window, wearing no jewelry and protected by no royal ceremony. For years, Every conversation between them had passed through protocol, public duty, or Charles himself. Now, for the first time, the woman who had become queen faced Diana's eldest son completely alone and admitted that the bracelet had never truly been about fashion. William had accepted the meeting because he wanted to hear her explanation without advisors or palace staff shaping every word. Before he entered, Catherine had offered him only one piece of advice. Private understanding must never replace public responsibility. William carried those words with him because this was no longer simply about grief. It had become a question of trust, authority, and whether royal status could ever justify crossing a clearly protected boundary. Camilla made no attempt to hide behind confusion. She openly admitted requesting the bracelet and allowing a trusted aide to find a way around the curator's refusal. The queen consort accepted that her decision had set everything else into motion, from the altered records to the dramatic interruption of the state banquet. Then she revealed the truth she had kept buried. For years, she said, she had lived under the shadow of Diana. Every room she entered, every jewel she wore, every public appearance she attended. Someone always compared her to the former Princess of Wales. Camilla believed that wearing one unmistakable piece connected to Diana would finally prove she had moved beyond those endless comparisons. I thought wearing it would make the comparisons finally stop, she admitted. William showed no sign of sympathy. He answered calmly but firmly. That bracelet could never give you that victory. He continued. Taking my mother's jewelry without permission didn't erase the past. It only proved how much you still feared it. Camilla then revealed another important detail. According to her recorded statement, the suspended aide had created the handwritten authorization after she made only a verbal request. He copied her personal cipher, the private mark used to validate instructions from her office, to protect himself if the bracelet was ever discovered. She also admitted knowing that the bracelet's clasp had been replaced because the original fastening was too small for her wrist. That confession eliminated any remaining suggestion that everything had been an accident. William slowly turned toward the door. Camilla stopped trying to defend herself. Instead, she quietly said she was willing to accept removal from all future jewelry selection decisions and would personally write letters of apology to both William and Harry. For the first time, she did not ask Charles to protect her from the consequences of her own actions. William paused before leaving. Without looking back, he said, "You wore it because the comparison never ended for you." He agreed to tell Charles that she had finally spoken honestly. But he also made one thing perfectly clear. The truth may influence the punishment, but it cannot erase what happened or immediately restore trust. For the first time, the royal family finally knew the complete truth. Now only one question remained. Could the monarchy survive if that truth became public? The palace tried to control the story. But before any official statement could shape public opinion, a single image told the entire nation everything it needed to know. At the next day's diplomatic reception, Charles stood alongside William and Catherine. The chair reserved for Camilla remained empty. Within minutes, photographs of that empty seat spread across Britain and became the most discussed royal image of the day. The bracelet was no longer just a private family issue. It had become a public test of accountability at the very highest level of the monarchy. Buckingham Palace released a brief statement confirming that the state banquet had been interrupted after an item from a restricted private jewelry collection appeared without proper authorization. That collection referred to personal family treasures kept outside normal ceremonial use. The palace deliberately avoided mentioning Diana by name. But the silence only fueled even greater public curiosity. Camilla withdrew from the remainder of the state visit. Meanwhile, Charles continued a reduced schedule alongside William and Catherine, knowing that cancelling every event would only deepen the diplomatic embarrassment. The king needed to demonstrate that the monarchy could continue functioning, even while his own household remained divided. Outside Buckingham Palace, public attention intensified rapidly. Television crews broadcast live from the Victoria Memorial as crowds gathered behind the security barriers. One woman held up a photograph of Diana wearing the ruby bracelet. Another carried a handwritten sign that read, "Memory is not a costume." William noticed the sign before entering the reception. He said nothing, but Catherine immediately saw the change in his expression. She understood exactly why those words affected him so deeply. Once again, Diana's memory had become the center of a national debate, one neither William nor Catherine could control. The following morning, a major newspaper pushed the controversy even further. Its front page displayed two photographs side by side. One showed Diana wearing the ruby bracelet years earlier. The other showed Camilla wearing the very same piece at the state banquet. Across the top stretched one bold headline: "The jewel that stopped the palace." Public opinion quickly divided. Some believed Camilla had deliberately crossed a sacred line. Others argued Charles had humiliated his own wife by stopping the banquet before foreign dignitaries instead of speaking to her privately. Alone in his office, Charles watched the television coverage in silence. The moment Diana's photograph appeared on screen, he quietly switched the television off. He understood that a chapter of the past he had spent years trying to manage had returned. This time, however, the entire country was judging how he chose to respond. Later that day, Buckingham Palace issued a second statement. It confirmed that the palace aide responsible for falsifying authorization records and altering the archive system had been dismissed. The statement also acknowledged that Camilla herself had requested access to the restricted bracelet. During the evening reception, cameras repeatedly focused on the empty chair beside Charles. The king glanced toward it only once before turning back to William and continuing to greet the guests. The public had already delivered its verdict through headlines, photographs, and silence. Now it was Charles's turn to make the decision that would define his reign. Charles didn't end his marriage. He didn't strip Camilla of her title. And he didn't pretend the bracelet had appeared by accident. Instead, the king chose a response that addressed the real issue. Standing before William, Catherine, and Camilla, Charles carefully placed Diana's ruby bracelet back inside its original case. Then he made a decision that would shape the future of the royal household. No member of this family will ever again use Diana's private legacy to settle personal conflicts, he declared. The controversy ended without revenge. It also ended without complete forgiveness. Instead, it concluded with a clear boundary that would never again be crossed. Once the investigation was complete, Charles gathered everyone together. The dismissed palace aide accepted responsibility for falsifying records and manipulating the archive system. But the king also made another fact unmistakably clear. Camilla had personally requested the bracelet. She had approved the effort to obtain it. And she had knowingly worn it before the world. Charles then announced that Diana's private jewelry collection would be placed inside a protected family trust, a legal arrangement created to preserve important belongings under carefully controlled supervision. William and Harry would oversee the collection together, removing those personal pieces from ordinary palace access and ensuring no similar incident could happen again. Camilla listened without objection. As part of the decision, she lost all authority over ceremonial jewelry selections for the next royal year. From that point forward, every jewelry request connected to her office would require approval from the royal collections keeper, as well as a second authorization from Charles's private secretary. William watched quietly as Camilla placed a handwritten letter before him. Inside, she admitted that insecurity, not duty, had guided her decision. She acknowledged that wearing Diana's bracelet had been an attempt to overcome comparisons that had followed her for years. William accepted the letter. He did not offer forgiveness. Not yet. Charles then turned toward Camilla. He told her that protecting their marriage could never require him to ignore the pain carried by his sons. Moments later, he looked at William. The king reminded him that honoring Diana's memory should never become a reason to punish the living forever. William understood the distinction. Justice had been served. Revenge had not. He then announced one final decision. The bracelet would never return to the general royal collection. Instead, it would remain sealed until Princess Charlotte became old enough to understand its history and decide for herself whether it should ever appear in public again. Charles quietly closed the case and handed it to William. Holding it carefully for a brief moment, the prince simply said, "This belongs with the family." Camilla's greatest loss wasn't a royal privilege or a priceless jewel. It was realizing that status could never replace memory. Charles's greatest success wasn't stopping the state banquet. It was proving that even a queen must answer for decisions that cross personal and moral boundaries. In the end, the crown preserved its dignity because it chose accountability over concealment. Diana's legacy remained protected. Camilla accepted the consequences of her choices. And Charles brought the crisis to a close without destroying the family he was still trying to hold together. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more royal updates. We'll see you in the next video.